Thank you very much for coming to this breakout session on independent data access centers. I'm Knut Olsen. I'm an astronomer at Noir Lab. I'm also one of the international program coordinators. You heard about the in-kind program on Tuesday from Phil Marshall. And this is co-hosted by Luis da Costa from Linea in Brazil. We have many members of Rubin data management and operations also have been very helpful in sort of vetting this presentation and starting this discussion. Oh, what happened? There we go. Okay. Yeah, just a friendly reminder, as you've heard before throughout the session, you all agreed to abide by the code of conduct. You can remind yourself of it on the website. Rubin adheres to principles of kindness and trust and respect and diversity, and any discriminatory behavior won't be tolerated. The code of conduct has how you should respond if you witness or experience any bullying or harassment. And also, so all the talks, including this one, are going to be recorded. And if you don't want to be recorded, you could just turn your camera off. The video should be available the next day, so tomorrow. And questions can be handled through Slack, which is the preferred method because that will be stored. And you can vote on questions that you like. You can also use the Zoom chat feature for questions, but prefer the Slack channel if you can do that. And then feel free to use emojis to express sentiments about what you hear during the talk. Okay. So the goals of this session, one is to, for those who don't know what they are, to introduce the concept of independent data access centers, which are one of the forms of in-kind contributions that were recommended and hopefully will be fully approved with data rights agreements. As part of the IDACs, we have a coordination group and intended to share experiences and work together on establishing this network of IDACs. And we'd like this session to be a way to connect people within the IDACs coordination group. And also for potential users of the IDAC network, get feedback from them, and also on from the providers on how to best match the user needs to the computational and storage and service resources offered by the IDACs. So we won't go over the in-kind program here. That was discussed on Tuesday, and you can listen to that recorded session if you weren't able to attend. There is also an IDAC category on community.lsst.org that you can visit to learn about IDACs and learn about the resources, and also it will be the venue for communicating within the IDACs coordination group. So I assume some familiarity with this, but there's probably more information than any one person has taken in. Okay, so what is an IDAC? So it was defined both in the handbook for proposal teams that was given to in-kind proposers and referred to the guidelines for Rubin IDACs that was basically developed by Rubin Data Management. In short, there are centers that augment the computing, storage, and data access options for the Rubin community over what is available at the data access centers. there are different types of IDACs. So one is a scientific processing center, which mainly is intended to be a place that offers computing and storage for scientific applications related to Rubin. There is of order one of these. The other is a light IDAC, which is of a scale that allows to store some of the LSST catalog data, but not all, and offers additional storage and computing resources to use that catalog data. And then there are about a dozen of these. And then there's the full IDAC scale, which can be up to much of the data that Rubin LSST will deliver, and will be a center of similar scale to the data access centers, although there's room for customization there. I sort of hinted at this already, but so the types of IDACs, they tend to map to the types of Rubin data products offered, right? So a scientific processing center is sort of a customized processing center where you might, for instance, have user-defined data products that somebody needs to use as a basis for a large compute job. So that would be one way to set up a scientific processing center. The light IDACs are generally will serve a light version of the object catalog. This object light catalog, while it's mentioned in the guidelines for Rubin IDACs document that's presented here, has not been really fully defined. So that's one of the questions I think that this group can address. So what would be the most useful information to go into that object light catalog? And then the full IDAC is, and this is a larger scale, so it's imagining, maybe the full catalog data, some portion of the imaging data itself, perhaps the alerts, or some mix of these, depending on the scale and ambition of the IDAC itself. And sort of the criteria for what these IDAC types to deliver is outlined in Appendix C of the guidelines for Rubin IDACs. I shouldn't use the word requirements here. Actually, it's criteria is a better one. And so you should look at that Appendix C for those criteria. The one criteria that is common to all is that they all must be accessible to the Rubin science community and respect Rubin data rights. So it's not, one doesn't go to the IDAC as a way to bypass Rubin data rights agreements. They have to respect those data rights. Okay. Yeah, so what do the IDACs provide? Again, copies of key data products and excess capacity in computing and storage. And so just looking over the recommended IDAC program from the in-kind program, you can calculate what the excess capacity above the Rubin Data Access Center that will be delivered to the US community of users, basically using what has been budgeted for a single user at the Rubin DAC. And you can see that the network of IDACs will expand the available computing and storage resources by a factor of several. So this is quite a large resource and a valuable resource that we need to make good use of. IDACs bring other things as well, not just computing and storage. They might provide access to other data sets and services that won't necessarily be available at the Rubin Data Access Center. In many instances, the interface that the IDACs are planning to use is the Rubin Science Platform. It's required for a full IDAC, but many of the light IDACs will also be planning to run the Rubin Science Platform, so a common interface to this data set. And having this network of collaborating providers, I think, is a pool of talented people who might develop innovations in data access and services that could be shared broadly across the network. So it's quite an exciting program, and now we need to make sure that we establish it well and it serves the users and the providers. So I invited a few of the IDACs to share a single slide describing what they will provide. So this is not comprehensive. It's not all of the IDACs, but these slides give you sort of a sampling of what kinds of data and services and resources the user community will be able to expect from them. So first, this is Luis's slide on the Brazilian IDAC managed by Linnea. Right, so this is a light IDAC that has infrastructure amounting to 5 petabytes of user storage, 500 cores. They'll be running the QServe database technology and Kubernetes. With various services, including running the Rubin Science platform. They have their own science portal. They have supercomputer access and the Dataverse, which you can Google and look up what that is for research products. They also serve other data sets, including SDSS and the Dark Energy Survey. And they have experience in user support in many forms, and will be bringing this experience to their light IDAC. I'm just going to read through these slides. If the people who wrote the slides feel want to jump in and add something, please do so. But this is, yep.
Just to add that we also have offer to host the data from SOAR, which might be useful. I mean, it's not completed, the agreement, but we are working on it.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, so there's also a light IDAC plan for Poland. This is similar storage and computing power as to the IDAC in Brazil, so 500 cores of computing, 5 petabytes of continuous storage, and they basically conforming to the guidelines specified in the guidelines document for a light IDAC, and then we'll be running the Rubin Science platform. Yeah, and then be an IDAC in Denmark, also serving the object-like catalog. This is 2,500 CPU cores, also offering GPUs, and so as a community, I think the Rubin Data Access Center, there hasn't been development explicitly towards the use of GPUs, but these could clearly be very valuable for many scientific workflows. Several petabytes of storage, ramping up to 7 petabytes, also running the Rubin Science platform. The object-like catalog will be the core data product, but also community-derived data products and plans for serving or ingesting the LSST alert stream. A number of other catalog data sets listed here, and hundreds to over 1,000 simultaneous users envisaged to be supported by this IDAC. So there's clearly experience here in running computationally intensive tasks and the resources to back those up. So I'll move on. And then finally, the UK IDAC is a full IDAC, which will be operating during Rubin operations with capacity for 1,000 to 1,500 users. plan to host the 2 most recent data releases and operating the Rubin Science platform, which is one of the criteria for a full IDAC. Provide science support, and since there'll also be a data processing facility, all of this data that they will be doing the processing on will already be in-house. So it's the IDAC. This IDAC is sort of the complement to their data processing facility. A number of additional data sets and functionality and services. I think George provided some notes here on these, but maybe actually if he just wants to jump in and add anything that I missed, please go ahead, George.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
I think you've covered it pretty well, to be honest. In terms of additional data sets, we have a number of R&D activities ongoing right now. And some of the highlights I've put down here. So there is a group that is using the LSST stack to process infrared data at the moment from the VISTA telescope. And the aim is to create fusion catalogs that combine measurements from both the Rubin survey and from these infrared surveys. There's a group that is working on a variant of crossmatch specifically designed to deal with crowded fields. And we will be using that to host crossmatch catalogs with a number of popular ancillary surveys. And we are also expecting to be a community broker receiving the Rubin Observatory's alert stream, and we are looking at ways to integrate the community broker functionalities into the science platform. That's a little bit unclear at the moment how best to do that, because the use cases and the science cases are slightly different, but we'd hope to be able to do something like that. And one of the activities that's building on the community broker is to use the foremost spectroscopic telescope to do follow-up on interesting transient events that are picked up by the alert stream.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Yeah, great. So these slides were just to kind of give you a flavor of the kinds of things that the IDACs will provide, and there are additional IDACs that are part of the recommended program that will broaden this further.
We have a couple of questions. We have a couple of questions here. Should I?
Okay. Yeah.
No. Well, Tim is asking about how are they plumbing those catalogs into the RCP TAP infrastructure, and will UK supporting dynamic creation of virtual data products from those data releases?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't catch the entirety of the.
Oh, the first question was actually about catalogs, if we should use Butler or not. And the other one is, will UK be supporting dynamic creation of virtual data products from those data releases?
Yeah. So I think this is a question for George.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so yes, in principle, yes. I mean, we have space allocated to user-generated data products. It depends to some extent how much space these data products require. I mean, there's a lot of data in the Rubin Observatory surveys, and some of these could be of the same order of magnitude as the original survey.
Right.
So, but we're certainly planning to have an ability to do that.
I'm specifically talking about the virtual data products. So a data release involves the actual deep coads, but there are different coads that we do generate during the data release, but we don't archive. But in the main US data facility, we have a requirement that people can ask for the data sets that would have been created but are no longer available, and then we batch them off and create them dynamically, serve them to you, and then it's essentially delete them.
Yeah, that's part of the service architecture, is to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood the question. The short answer is I'm not sure at this point.
Yeah. So like, yeah, I mean, so if somebody asks for a specific thing that is part of DPDD, but is not actually a file on disk at the moment, the system will go off and schedule a batch and say, we'll get back to you in 10 minutes with the answer. And then it will turn up. But you don't have to keep them around forever. It's just you need compute that you can run up, do the thing, and then delete them again after you've served them to effectively.
Yeah, and these are not obscure things. These are difference images and you know, interesting types of coads. So there are definitely things that we expect people will really be asking for. In addition, although we save all the single epoch calibrated images in a somewhat lossy compressed form, there's also virtual data product access to the uncompressed, you know, as originally created single epoch calibrated images, which along with the difference images are only kept for 30 days in the baseline.
And in theory, of course, you could, even though you're not storing the raws, you could make a dynamic request to the USDF for the raw to then regenerate the CalEx, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're planning to run as close to the software stack that runs at the US Data Access Center as possible. And there is compute and storage capacity to do these on the fly processing. So providing we have the right raw or processed data on site or can easily access it from the US Data Access Center, then we would be able to do that, yes.
Right, okay. Yeah, and the other, sorry.
So no, go ahead, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, the other question was more about if you say you're installing an instance of the Rubin Science Platform, this is for the different IDACs, but then you only have the object catalog. To a certain extent, it doesn't really matter, the RSP, right? Because you presumably already have a tap access into your other holdings.
So Tim, I'll on that further down in the Slack.
Yeah, so Will made a discussion. Will's on Slack about that.
Both Will and Frosty have written comments in Slack about that. Okay.
So, I mean, I think we should be clear for the IDAC, for the light IDACs, which is most of them except for the UK, running the RSP, I think, has probably little use and a lot of effort. The original intention I had was a little bit like we did for Gaia, that you would have the catalog and serve it via whatever mechanism you currently had. And in the tech note in RTN3, it says, you may want QServe. We would want you to implement web APIs like TAP or something that match our TAP service, but not necessarily use the one we have, although we use the CIDC one, so it's available for you if you want it. And I think that was my intention, that the light IDAC would use their infrastructure. That the reasoning with Gaia, and I think the reasoning here, that makes it more accessible to your users who use your regular services anyway. This will appear like another catalog to them, rather than bringing them into our ecosystem and making it look exactly like ours. If it's just the object-like catalog, because the RSP is much more about images, Butler, and a few more things, and accessing the catalogs. But I think it's a lot more. And so I will try to clarify that in the note. But since we have most of the IDAC people here, let's be clear, it's not a requirement that you run the RSP. It is a piece of software you can download, but it's a bit of work to make it work. I think George could tell you more about that if he wanted to.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that sort of experience of, installing and trying to run the RSP would be really valuable to have through the coordination group. I think having something that looks like or provides some of the same functionality as the RSP, so has a portal and a notebook server, and the ability to work on things through the notebook. I think that part of the interface is really valuable. And so if in sort of the native light IDAC interface is simply just a web interface where you can download catalogs, that may not sort of be what users are expecting once they start working with Rubin data. I think the experience with the DP0, I think, is teaching users how they will expect to access Rubin data, and so there is some value, I think, in having that access not feel too different when you go to the IDACs. But this is, I think this should be maybe a question that we discuss towards the end.
Yeah, like I don't want to put people off, but like the UK integrating Vista into their RSP would be great. And if they
Tim, you're talking over the hands, right?
Okay, sorry.
Okay, all right.
I was trying to call Frosty, but okay,
Thank
Frosty,
you.
go ahead.
All right, so I think a number of things here. So us should have become obvious from this discussion. I think Rubin operations and the IDAC contributors are still in discussion about the appropriate vision of what is an IDAC, what does an IDAC have to do, what it would be good if it did but not required, and what it doesn't have to do if it doesn't want to, and so on. And so this is all in very active discussion and evolution, and obviously understanding what IDACs would like to do is a way of informing this debate. So I just want to say that because a lot of people are making like kind of definitive sounding statements, and you know, if it's not written down in RTN 003, it's just not Rubin policy to require it. The fact that people are enthusiastic about the science platform and want to run it is great, but it is not absolutely policy to run it. And in fact, as Tim was trying to say before I so rudely cut him off after he rudely cut me off, is that you know, it's a complex system. It's very heavyweight. It requires a lot of engineering effort. It's important to understand that the UK is a special case because they are actually a data facility. They're doing Rubin processing, and they're also contributing directed efforts to help us support them with their science platform usage. So this is an evolving subject. We will have more. I think this is just the beginning of the discussion. I think people should definitely express desires of what level of this Rubin code base, including QServer, RSP, Butler, so on, they are interested in utilizing, and why would this be an advantage to them and to their community and users? But just the matter is not decided at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Frosty. I mean, I think it's worth pointing out at this point that the in-kind program was stood up was not something that we imagined having when the construction project started. So it's not part of construction. But it is a program that is adding really valuable resources to the US Rubin community, and so. But because IDACs in particular, they can place demands or have impact on the development of or on the operation of the Rubin Data Access Center. It's really important to have this conversation now, both with all the parties involved, the users, the IDAC providers, and Rubin Data Management and others. And so that's what this is intended to be. So we are starting this planning effort now. As you heard on Tuesday, right? We've now rolled out the manual for in-kind contributors and recipients, which has a section on what should go into the IDAC work plan development. You know, this is a very high level guidance at this point. So you know, RTN 003, the guidelines for IDACs, provides a set of criteria that the different scales of IDACs were asked to meet. And some of that might require some development, and will need some choices to be made, right? And so that should that development, or what you imagine that development should be, should go into that work plan. And it doesn't need to, doesn't mean that you know exactly how we are going to get from now to when the IDAC operations begin. It might require some experimentation and exploration in some cases, but we should have a plan for how what should be done. Work plan should also have some description and schedule for the planned installation of the computing and storage resources, including the refreshes of it and the maintenance. We need to think about for each IDAC, what data will be transferred and how that will be ingested. I think for the light IDACs, this is not such an onerous task, because if it really is scaled for the object light catalog, which we don't know exactly what it is yet, but it's should have a volume of the order of 100 terabytes. That's not it's not such a huge volume that it's difficult to get at over network connections, as long as they're fast enough. I think these work plans should have some idea of what pre-operations testing needs to be done in order to make sure that things are working as expected. The kinds of user support that they imagine they will have to do. And then this last bullet, the anticipated interactions with the IDACs coordination group, was really just, it's a little bit of a placeholder at this point, but sorry, the dog is bothering me. It's a placeholder for how the IDACs coordination group will work with the IDAC providers to basically link the user communities to the IDACs. And so I think this is another area that we'll need to do. We have some questions on at the end. So this IDACs coordination group, as I said, it's a forum for the IDAC providers and users to share notes and really to get at solving problems together. We want to make sure that it's easy to connect users to the IDACs that suit them. Let's see. Next slide. This is not advancing. There we go. Yeah. So on this question of connecting users to IDACs, this is probably the most open-ended question of all, because we don't exactly know how it's going to work. It may need to work differently in different cases. It's something that we're going to have to explore together. There is one guiding principle that any data rights holder should be able to go to any IDAC. So we're not segmenting the community of users. They had to allow all people with Rubin data rights. This does not mean that IDACs will universally share all their data products. IDACs may have unique data products, as you saw from the slides describing the different example IDACs. The point of the coordination group is to help the IDACs connect to user community. So one way in which maybe we could make best use of the IDACs is connect certain IDACs to certain science collaborations, or certain segments of those science collaborations, or segments of the user community, so that they can run their large computations at a sort of a specialized IDAC, or ones that involve are particularly intensive for compute and storage, so that so basically IDACs would specialize in some area of science. Another possible concept is to have something like a dashboard that would basically advertise what storage, CPU, data, and services are available at a different, so the set of IDACs. So you'd have a page, a web page, imagine, that would have sort of be a place to advertise the IDACs and to guide the users towards the one that best suits them. I mean, if you wanted to, you could think of this as like when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles in Tucson, there's several sites around town. They will have wait times on the web page there. So if there's an IDAC where the DAC is particularly loaded with users or jobs at a particular time, you could find one that isn't being used as heavily. That is one concept. Within maybe there is also requires development. I think is that the dashboard will require some development. If there could be some, especially IDACs could work together to maybe try to balance the load between them in some way. Exactly how that would work, I don't know. It's just a concept. I think your ideas are really needed here. This is a discussion we should have, but we had to make sure that that any model for how we get users plugged into the IDAC network needs to take into account its impact on Rubin operations as well as the IDAC providers themselves and the user community. So we invited IDAC providers in particular to submit a bunch of questions beforehand. So, Luis, are there questions in Slack now that we should start discussing, or should we go into these questions?
Michael, I think he should open up his mic because they are very long questions or comments.
Okay.
Michael. Mike?
Sorry, I mean, I just had a comment in Bill's thread about the light IDAC vision. I guess I heard him saying that one of the purposes of being a light IDAC is to use your favorite. Like if you love, whatever your favorite data center is doing, like the US, like MAST or IPAC or something, you would like to access the catalog in that same format. If what you wanted was the RSP interface, you could just go to the main data facility and use that, as long as you didn't need huge compute. So I just wanted to pull out that I felt like that was one vision that I think to be relatively popular. And I guess while I have the mic, sort of an extension of that, while I think load balancing in some sense makes sense, the whole point of load balancing is the user doesn't have to think about it, right? Like when I log into my DMV, PA, Gov, whatever account, I in fact don't have to think about what site I am at. So I think the load balancing is only interesting if what you're really just providing is a pool of compute and the user doesn't have to know. But what skin they want on their user experience might be something that can be provided from some different providers.
Yeah. Yes, Michael, I agree with those comments, and particularly on the ideal load balancing sense is that all of the infrastructure behind is invisible to the user. The issue is that if we can try to make things as easy for the user as possible in order to take advantage of these expanded compute and storage resources and data services. But the impact on the needed development and potentially on Rubin operations itself could be quite large. So we need to understand all of those impacts before pushing ahead with any given model. I liked your comments about the sort of the bespoke interfaces that various places have and that users have gotten comfortable with. I think that sort of line of reasoning has good merit. I also have the sense that all of the places that you mentioned are sort of going into the science platform concept, right? There is no sort of large data center that isn't exploring this concept of a science platform where you can bring code to the data. It just seems to be the next step in evolution of data centers, and that would be good to do that in a way that that was somewhat coordinated.
Note, there is a question from KT here. KT, would you like to ask your question?
It was just a comment that if we don't actually share user home directories, then load balancing, you're not going to end up with the same view when you go to an IDAC that you would from a different IDAC or the USDF. It just adds a complication for how we implement things.
Yeah.
Go ahead. That's it.
Okay, so I'm gonna start. We're just going through some of the questions that were provided beforehand. Many of these came from Luis, so thank you for them. So the first question: so will the data from DP1 and DP2 be available for the IDACs? Right. So DR1 is the first data release, right, for the LSST survey. But before that, there will be these data previews, which one can imagine would be valuable for testing and standing up an IDAC. But delivering those to the IDACs now is not in the current plan, and is not part of the resource plan. That's and of course Rubin data management will be quite busy with getting ready for Rubin operations. But I don't think that would close down the topic of discussion if the impact to Rubin was small enough. And I see KT has his hand raised, and so does Frosty.
Frosty.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, KT.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say, I don't think it would be a problem to deliver DP1 and DP2 data at the time of DR1. Not at the time of DP1 and DP2, but for the at the time of the data release, it probably should be okay. So that's an alternative.
Yeah. Imagine that part of the reason for wanting DP1 and DP2 would be to try to get ready early. But yeah, there could be interest, I think, along with DR1 as well. Frosty?
Yeah, not to keep flogging the dead horse, but I agree that the value, presumably whoever asked this question, who should probably identify themselves, was thinking of using it as a precursor to their DR1 service.
Was me.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and answer it on that basis. So as Kitty said, delivering the data is not an issue, but remember that rewind earlier where we said that, we're still kind of developing this notion of what the IDAC architecture is like. So, and as was mentioned earlier, during the construction time, there is, even if this kind of work will be prioritized operations, construction time is not part of the deliverables. So that means if you did somehow get DP1 and DP2 data, you would be actually responsible for applying data rights authorizations on those with your own, because even if you were intending downstream to use our own authorization, we would not be available to you at that time. And it's not clear on what timeline it would be available later.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay. All right, next question. So when is t = 0 for IDACs operations, right? So this is in the original in-kind proposal plans, we sort of had slotted in FY24 for this proposals. But we've learned that DR1 is likely in July 2025. So I think we need to have a discussion. I will have this discussion with the IDAC teams one-on-one. Is that it would make the most sense for operations to start in July 2025. If that's impossible, then we should talk about those other factors. Generally, the IDACs are committed to sort of the 10-year +3 of operations, and so that in part sets the the t = 0. Okay. So next question, from where will the IDACs get their data? Hasn't been addressed yet. I think I said earlier that I think for light IDACs, the data volume is not likely such a huge issue, and this is a manageable problem. Our full IDAC, the UK IDAC, will already have the data through its role as a data processing facility. And so maybe that's the answer, but it does need to be more formalized than that.
Can I add, Knut, that is also in RTN3, and I've suggested 2 or 3 different ways of doing that, between content delivery network, copying it on Google. So there's several ways we can do this which don't impact the USDF, where we may have a problem. You say it's not a problem. That's 14 copies of the catalog, which is rather large. And at some point, if you want to deliver all of that to these different places or some subset of it, and again, I will argue for 1 copy that they can subset when they get it, because I don't want to make 14 copies of different columns of that database.
Right.
So, and again, we have sort of, or I indicated in there, that could end up being a financial cost on those IDACs, because if I use a content delivery network or Google, they might charge something like 1 cent per gigabyte to download that or something. And I think it's something that the IDACs ought to be aware of, that they could end up paying for that copy. If we ship them disks, they'd pay for FedEx, right?
Yeah, good points. Go on to next question. So which authentication and authorization system will be used, right? So the criterion in RTN 003 is that the authentication authorization system must be in line with Rubin Observatory access, right? But this doesn't mean that Rubin is committed to providing an ANA service. And so this is also something that I think needs to be discussed with the Rubin people online as they are now. So should we talk about this now, or defer this as a topic that needs to be addressed at some later date?
Go ahead, Frosty.
So you could just feel the hand being raised, right? There was a disturbance in the force. So I actually suggest that we do defer this, and I'll say this for a couple of reasons. Number one, ANA discussions are extremely technical and, not for the faint of heart, and this is quite a general audience. I will say the second thing is that I am certainly trying to understand what IDAC's vision of their kind of model is, and so whether delegating authentication authorization to Rubin or any other such schemes is not a question that can be generally answered without the context of a particular IDAC's architecture and services. So I think this is just something we have to discuss downstream.
Okay. Yeah. I'll move on to the next one. So will the IDACs be able to use the DAC services for image display cutouts? Will this be done through the portal aspect of the RSP? Right. So I think the answer here is that in principle, an IDAC could use the image cutout API from the DAC and get that data that way. But it's important to remember, the DAC service was designed to be aimed at the individual users in the DACs, not as bulk transfers from through data centers. So depending on the nature of the requests, the volume, and the amount of data returned, I think this could be a potential issue that I think we need to understand before saying that the IDACs will be able to get as many image cutouts as they want through the DAC services. Frosty, do you still have your hand raised? Is that an old hand or a new hand?
Yes, it went down and up again. So I think
I'm not paying attention, and she's always her hand is always up. So
yeah, there's a Chumbawamba song about this. So just want to add a couple of things to this. Number one, again, this is one of those questions that is very hard to answer definitively absent any context, right? Because the motivation behind answering this question would definitely affect the nature of the answer. So I think this goes back on we want to understand the individual IDAC context for this question. I will say, I can provide you with a knee-jerk reaction, which is my personal knee-jerk reaction and does not represent the views of the Rubin Observatory. But the whole point of the IDACs is actually to contribute resources. And if you're using my cutout server, you're consuming my resources. So I would be definitely probing to see what the kind of use case behind this is and how it can be addressed in potentially other ways. That's just a general comment.
Yeah. I think the nature of the question is that if you're serving, catalog data, at some point you could imagine that a user would also want to see images or image cutouts around a select number of objects, and so will that require basically having a copy of the images themselves or not?
I understand the scientific motivation, but the issue is the who has the burden of servicing the user, and if the burden of servicing the user comes to when the image service is the most expensive computational operation that the RSP actually performs, and so if the burden comes back to the RSP, then there's no in-kind happening because I'm essentially servicing that request. So. Just the kind of thing that I would like to hammer out in detail in a specific example.
In the absence of IDACs, of course, those users would be coming to the DAC to do that very same thing, right? So
it has a hand up again. Not even the it's the physical hand already. It's not the logical one.
So Knut, just to like not bash at you, but the thing is. This is why I'm saying it depends on the context. For example, it is true that that user would have come to the RSP if they weren't come to the IDAC. And so if that usage is actually proportional to user load, then it's not an increase in load. However, an IDAC could have a project to actually generate an atlas, which would involve making a lot of requests that are actually independent of user load. And that would be a net increase, right? So point is, the protocol is standard. Theoretically, there is no limitation, technical limitation to doing this. In practice, we should discuss the individual modality. That's my point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, let's go on to the next question. It's a question about handling light curve production, classification, and search. Will be done as part of the brokers. Will IDACs play any role or go to the DACs and brokers for their queries? I think George addressed this question in his description of the UK IDAC wanting to have an interface with LSST. There is a broker's webpage and a set of approved brokers now. The brokers are really designed to handle the time domain discovery. I do think, like the UK IDAC and LSST, there could be an interest in a partnership between IDAC and a broker for computing, storage, and user interfaces. Of course, that's something that they would have to set up on their own. For searching light curves, that's really what users will be going to the source catalog to do. And of course, an IDAC of sufficient scale, like a full IDAC, could also provide that service. Gregory.
Yeah, I think you touched on this right at the end. I mean, there's you can think of light curves as something associated with alerts specifically, where we're looking at them kind of as they develop in real time, and that's a very broker-oriented task. The other thing is that we produce statically reprocessed light curves as part of every data release, so that the full kind of consistently calibrated light curves are just static data products. They're mainly the dia source catalog. That's part of the annual data releases, and those, as you said, are not object light. They are a lot bigger than object light, and they would be at full IDACs. So, so it's a good question though about like if someone is at an IDAC light that has only the object catalog, it certainly would be a very natural question for anyone to want to get the known light curve for one of the entries in that catalog. And so that's actually not that different logically from the cutout question on the previous slide. These follow-on questions that are enabled by having the object light catalog. So I think we need to do more discussion offline to try to understand what that kind of cascade is from people who are at IDAC lights who will be interested in these other data products and how they will be able to get to them.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question. We're running a bit low on time. So do you have a list of IDACs? Will there be an effort to encourage them to share their experience? We don't have a list yet that we're publishing because there's a recommended list that was approved by the management board, and the IDACs coordination group is really there to encourage to share experience. So, but soon DRAs will hopefully be signed, and then yes, there will be a list of IDACs. There's a question about science-ready catalogs and ancillary data. I think particularly the production of object light and what ancillary data need to accompany it is not yet determined, but there isn't any data that's off limits, I think, to the IDACs. It's really a matter of being able to serve it at scale with and be able to serve the users. So I'm going to go there. Will DR1 data be publicly accessible? What is that? T = 0 period. Yes, DR1 will become public after 2 years, but there isn't a plan yet on serving that public data, right? So this is in the data policy document. Requirements for light IDAC running the RSP, and I think this is a technical question that we could address later one-on-one, but the basic working assumption is that a user using the RSP will be allocated roughly 2 CPU cores and close to 1 terabyte of storage. It changes over time, but that's the scaling. Storage systems required for light IDAC. I think a lot of this is described, at least touched on in the guidelines for Rubin IDACs, but you'll need storage for the database system and for user storage, and so the type of that storage really depends on the application. Okay, going to the end here. So can Spectra be provided from an IDAC without any development on our side? I think the answer is no. It's going to require development. Particularly if you're using the RSP or some other interface, you're going to need to do some development to integrate spectral data. There was a discussion on this 2 days ago in the in-kind session, which was interesting, but this is development in a number of areas. But it's something that I think would be great to discuss as part of the IDACs coordination group. Is there any way to operate 2 physically separated systems as one IDAC seamlessly? So this kind of gets to the load balancing concept. And I think, yeah, there probably is a way to do it, but it's a technical problem that won't be solved by Rubin. And so it's going to require development if that's really something that's desired. I think that was the end of the pre-submitted questions. So we're almost out of time. Luis, are there any other burning questions that we should address?
No, none. Unless Frosty has another comment to make. Frosty?
No, well, since you how can I resist? So I will say that this is an exciting opportunity, and I would ask people to kind of bear with us as we are trying to figure out how to effectively work this program in a way that brings value to the community, the required value to the in-kind program, and a sensible kind of way of operating that we can all live with for 13 years. I will say, and I put this comment in the Slack, but for those people not on the Slack, I will say that I love being technically ambitious, as people know, but there are some kind of things that were brought up here that essentially have no predecessor in astronomy. And I would just be super careful. I mean, it's always nice to have aspirations, but I would be super careful that, we are in the kind of dreaming phase And these are no commitments, and we are not necessarily discussing things that it's kind of reasonable to expect us to pull off over the next few years. I would like to just mention to people who don't know, but I'm sure pretty much everybody knows at this point, that we are, the RSP is in operations through the data preview program before first light, which is pretty much unprecedented. And the good news is that we are learning a lot that will actually be of value, I think, to the IDAC community. And I would like to very much thank our British and French colleagues who are operating Rubin data facilities and therefore are deploying RSPs on their infrastructure. And they're also teaching us a lot about how to improve the deployability of the system for other organizations. But it does mean that the first light and commissioning part is still ahead of us, and therefore we're not kind of full into the how to serve DR1 data when we have it kind of frame of mind to the users, as we have other challenges ahead. So apologies if you kind of feel that you would have liked more technical guidance from us at that point. We do understand, we are trying to work to provide it, and it will come. It's just there's a lot on right now.
And I guess,
since I was the one that rose a lot of these questions, I fully understand your situation, and we understand that what you can do or cannot do. And I'm looking forward to have this coordination group, because this is the nice forum that we could discuss these more technical things and check what's reality and what's just a wish list.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Luis. And I also just like to close on saying that yes, there are challenges ahead, but I think the scale of resources, data, and services that the IDACs network is in a position to provide is really tremendously exciting for all of us, and for the US Rubin community in particular. And also, I think it's, as was envisioned for the in-kind program, and as Bob said in his operations presentation, bringing in the international collaborators to participate in this endeavor of discovery and the LSST survey, I think will have payoffs and benefits that are really hard to predict. And so I think we're all excited to make it work, even though there will be some challenging questions to address. So thank you all for attending, and thanks for the IDAC providers for submitting their slides to advertise themselves at this early stage, and for submitting the questions in advance. I think that was it's really helpful in getting the discussion going, and we'll continue it at various venues, including the community.lsst.org IDAC coordination group. Okay, thank you.